Hi, and welcome to session 1 of chapter 2. So chapter 2, we're going to finally start talking about CSS and formatting. Again, this one's broken into 3 sections, so I'm going to try to separate out those 3 so that you can watch them as you feel like it, hopefully get through all of them. Let me know if you have questions. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is introduce the concept of a style sheet in CSS. So if HTML defines the document in the content and the structure, CSS is designed to define how it looks. Style sheets are what they're called. So you can use any type of style sheet, but the language that style sheets are written in is called CSS. CSS is a language. Style sheet is a document type. So you can think of it as CSS is the language that the document is written in. When we look at CSS, we are currently using the version of CSS3. So there have been multiple versions over time since CSS was first started, but we're using CSS3 right now. Some of the older programmers are going to continue to use CSS2 and 1, and that's fine. Most of the CSS has been designed to be backwards compatible. So CSS rules that were in place in CSS1 will still be in place now. You just shouldn't see them as often. And as a newer programmer or learning a new concept, it's better to learn the new concepts. Trust me, there'll be a CSS4 before you know it. And what you will be learning will now be the old stuff. So right now in CSS3, there are more than 50 different modules that talk about how the design topics should be displayed. And the styles in CSS, the word cascading is important in here because the styles are designed in a hierarchy. And therefore, the lowest level in that hierarchy is the one that occurs first. Those are the browser styles. You may have noticed if you go to Edge or Chrome or Firefox or Safari, the page looks just a little bit different. That's because at the base level, the browser has some base styles that it uses. We call those user agent styles. And those are the base ones for the browser. They're applied first, and they're the ones that make the HTML look the way you expect it to look without any CSS. So if I put in an H1 tag, I can pretty much expect any browser is going to make that kind of a larger size and a little bit bolded. That's just the way the browser is going to define it. Each of the browsers uses a different user agent style, but they're all really similar. So you may find that like the newer Edge uses the same Chromium style as Chrome does, so they may look really similar, whereas Firefox still uses its own. So these are all a little bit different. After the browser styles are applied, the next level is called a user-defined style. This is when you go into your browser and you say, I want it to be at 150%. I want the text to always be large. I want the backgrounds to be contrasting colors. If you have issues with your site, this is something that you're going to change on your own in your user-defined styles in your browser. So as a user of a browser, you can go in and change these styles. They will be applied after the base browser styles next. So as we hierarchy up, those are the ones that come in next. They're useful if you have accommodations, and sometimes people can set up their browsers so that those will still come in significantly above other styles. The next is the one that we're going to spend the most time on, and those are called external style sheets. So those are the ones that are written in CSS. Those are the link to the style head that we've talked about. And those are the ones that you're going to be doing in this class. External style sheet, meaning that it is external to the HTML document itself. It is a separate file entirely. So the file is written in its own page and then linked at the top of the page. Those are external style sheets. We also have the ability to add embedded styles, which are defined in the header of the page under a style tag. So we can have a style tag, and then inside of that, add any of the CSS rules that we're going to be using inside of the header of an individual page. This is really convenient if you have pages that are unique to the rest of the site, if they want to have a different subset of rules for this page. If you have a large site, it's much more convenient to have an external style sheet that you can link at the top of every page to make your site look consistent. You don't really want different pages in your site to look different from other pages. So having an external style sheet means you only have to define those once and all of the sites get it. If you were to do an embedded style at the header of each page, you could copy and paste, but when you do copy and paste, you tend to make mistakes and things get changed and so on and so forth. The last of the styles that we're going to use are inline styles. You can actually apply a style attribute at the element level. So you can say h1 space, add the attribute style, style, equals, and then using quotes, go ahead and enter in the CSS rules that you want to change. So color, background color, margin, font, these kind of things you can change on an inline position. We don't recommend it for obvious reasons. It means that that page is really unique to your site. If you want to set all of a certain type to be a certain style, you want to do it in your external style sheet. You don't want to have to write it inline in every line on every element. If you have an element that just isn't fitting right and it just doesn't look right and you're not quite sure why, you could go in and do an inline style. So those are available. You can. Back before style sheets became external style sheets, we would do a lot of this individually at every element level. External style sheets made that better. So that's why. We also tend to do the external style sheets because with an HTML, we really want to keep all of the content in the HTML and all of the formatting at the CSS level. You don't kind of want them intermixed. You don't want to be adding CSS to your HTML document if you can avoid it. We're going to go ahead and open up our Chapter 2, Tutorial 2 folder for the tutorial. So HTML 002 or 02 and then the tutorial folder to get the files for the tutorial. So this first page here, home, we're going to go ahead and rename it. Remember, it's a TXT file. We got to rename it and then go ahead and look at it. So I've already opened it up. I can go ahead and do it again. This file in the browser. Remember, always write your name and the date. Okay, so we got a couple things here I just want to go over real quick. We have our header with our comment. We have our metadata with our character set and our keywords because we want to be able to be found on the internet. And our title up here, the Try and Succeed Sports. So TSS. Then we have our header, which is going to be this image up here. We have our nav bar, which looks like a basic. This is what a navigation list would look like if you didn't have any CSS. So in this case, it's just a nav bar with a unordered list with the word links in an H1. Then we have our article, our About TSS, which is this section here. And then inside of that, we have our classes, our philosophy, and then our comments. And these are all asides inside of our main article about. And finally, we have our footer down at the bottom with a couple of little special characters, our 8826 for our bullet, and our page. Not that our page looks terrible, it just looks a little bit boring. So there's not a lot of CSS going on here. There's not a lot of formatting. So everything here, with the exception of, you got an image here, everything is pretty much base HTML. So this is just text here. We've got a little bit of bolding going on in some cases, but in general, H1s, H2s, and some block quotes. But in general, there's nothing extra about this. There's no CSS at all. The first thing that we're going to do after we change our name and make sure that everything is updated is go ahead and add our CSS file. Now, we have created a TSS layout CSS file, and it's a pretty basic file. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. We've got some basic CSS for our body, giving us just our basic margins, our headers, our nav bar. We're just giving some margins to it, some floating, some width, that kind of thing. Our different articles with some specifics on which class they're going to reference, which element type, and then a specific article for the syllabus, and then our footer. So not a whole lot of CSS is going on in this layout page, but when we add it, so right now that CSS page is not in. We are going to go ahead and link in our header. Make sure you do it in your header with our href equals our TSS layout.css. Sorry, my IntelliSense had a hard time catching up. Rel is a style sheet. And we're going to go ahead and close that. And we're going to see, okay, so that changed things a little bit. It gave us the option here of having this into 3 little sections. So we have our links, that 20% there for our nav bar. This is our article here, and this is our aside over here for our comments, because we want the comments kind of on the side. So these 3 little sections inside of our about section, and then our comments, and then our footer is still hanging out at the bottom. So that is your basic adding of a CSS page to your HTML page. And as you can see, that gave us a layout just to make things a little bit more formatted. When we talk about our style rules, so I'm going to talk about style rules a lot when it comes to CSS. The style rule defines the style that's applied to the element or group of elements. Now you have a lot of options that you have here. One of these is the inline style where we use the style tags. One is the inline style with the H1. The other is the embedded with the style tags. But what you really want to pay attention to here is the style rule. What we have is a selector, a curly brace, open and close, to make sure you open and close it and keep everything contained inside of it. If you forget that closing brace, causes bad things. You have a property name and a value for that property, and you always end that with a semicolon. The semicolon will tell the browser, this is the extent of the property value. Let's move on to the next property. So if you skip your semicolons, it will make your CSS not work correctly. So we have a selector, a property, and a value. The selector tells us which elements, types are going to be applied to this, and you'll see as we move along how that works. Property is which property is affected, and that's the color, background, font style, font weight. We'll talk about those. And then what do you want to set the value to? Some browsers have their own properties, and you may be required to define those as well. So Mozilla Firefox has a couple of extra ones that are starting with an MOZ. You use MOZ dash and then tell the property type. And that we'll talk about that when we get a little bit more into browser extensions, and it's in your book as well. We're going to be adding some of those in our tutorials, but not a whole lot. So just so that you know when you see them, if it has a browser extension in the front, that means it's a browser specific style rule as opposed to a generic style rule. With our embedded style sheets, we're going to be adding style tags to your code, usually in the header if you're doing the embedded style sheets that define the style rules. And that's the example that I've given here. I've shown you the inline styles where you can say style with the individual values there. And then precedence and inheritance. So it's important to recognize with style rules that there is a precedence over a more generic rule as you go along. If I tell my HTML at the HTML level, I want my color to be white. And then at my body level, I tell the color I want it to be black. And then at an individual paragraph level, I tell it I want the color to be red. The paragraph is the more specific of the 3. It is the one that is going to be applied. So as long as there is no other color, my H1s are going to be black because that's what my body said. And the HTML doesn't do anything because in this case, the body is all that's showing in there. So you want to be really careful about your precedence of your style rules and make sure that when you write them, if you want a certain color, make sure you're writing it at the level that is appropriate for that color. There is also what we call style inheritance. That means that every child, every element that is under a given element that has a style rule has the same style rules as that element. Therefore, if I say in the body I want the color to be black, every paragraph underneath that is going to be black. If I say the paragraph is going to be red, any lists underneath there, any other elements, any interior paragraphs inside of that, they're also going to be red. So inheritance means the children underneath your parent element also get applied with the same style rules. We're also going to talk about dev tools. So F12 is the normal dev tool pop-up, and we'll talk about that in the video. The next thing that we're going to do real quick is just access our dev tools. It's important for you to be able to access your development tools. And I'm actually going to grab this and move it over a little bit so that our dev tools will show up a little bit better. Dev tools in most browsers are going to be just F12. So if I hit F12 here, it'll pull up my dev tools. If your dev tools do not pop up like that, you can always go to your ellipses, and then it's different in different browsers. It might be under your settings. It might be under your more tools. Dev tools is down here at Control-Shift-I. This is in Firefox. But F12 seems to almost always do it in every browser that I've really played with. So I don't do Mac, so I don't do Safari, but in general. Okay, so these are our dev tools. Let's actually open up our dev tools a little bit more so you can see what you get here. Couple of different things. First off, up at the top, very, very, very top here, elements, console, sources, network, performance, memory, application, security, and Lighthouse. I'm actually going to click over on the elements first. So with our elements, and this, I use this a lot when I'm developing. You can click this icon right here, the select an element on the page to inspect it. And you can select any given element in the whole page and it will go find it and then it'll tell you things about it. So this paragraph element here, this is the paragraph here. I can look at the HTML here, but I can also come down to the bottom here, or depending on how yours is set up, and look at the different styles that are set up. So in this case, I have a paragraph coming from my user agent style sheet that gives me a display and then a margin for this one. If I wanted to do, say, my nav bar here, you can see this one is coming from my TSS layout on line 27, where it's saying body and then the nav that is inside the body, give it the width, the float, and the margin. By the way, you can check these off and see what happens. So here, if I didn't have a margin, this is what it would look like. If it didn't float left, this is what it would look like. If it didn't have a width of 20, this is what it would look like. So one of the cool things about the dev tools is being able to do that with the different navigation elements. So I can use this select element to pick anything. Here's my image up here. And you can see as you just move around the page, it'll give you some information on it. What is its color? What's its font? What's its margins? Things like that. If you find your page isn't looking the way that you want, that's a really useful tool. Another thing that we can do, and we're going to get into this when we get into the mobile, is being able to toggle our device toolbar. We can change what device we want to look at. So in this case, it's just a basic website. But if I wanted to look at it as though it were a cell phone, I can click the toggle device and pick a given cell phone here. And this is what the page would look like on a cell phone if we had it on a cell phone. Toggle the device back and you get back to your website. Just a real quick thing on using your dev tools. When you want to create a CSS file, first off, you're going to give it the CSS extension, and that lets browsers and IDEs know that this is a CSS file. You want to make sure that you use your comments. Comments are not the same as they are in HTML documents. In HTML documents, you've got your angle bracket and your exclamation mark and your 2 dashes. In CSS, it's going to be the / */ that is familiar with a lot of other languages that we use. So your comments are going to be that // /*. They can be multiple lines. It's just wherever the / is. Again, it'll be color-coded in Visual Studio Code, so you'll be able to see that they're green and let you know where the comments start and end. We also have some CSS @ rules, and we call them @ rules because they use the ampersand. So the A with a little circle over it that we use in email addresses in the middle. So these are rules that give direction to the browser about the CSS file. They're not CSS rules because they're not applied to a given element. They are just about the CSS document. It's kind of like metadata. So the first one that we do, the first line that we always do in a CSS file is our character set. So we're going to do our ampersand, character set, and then we're going to use UTF-8 for the purposes of this class. There is no equal sign between character set and UTF-8, so just make sure you keep an eye on that. And we always end it with a semicolon. We can also import style sheets into the style sheet. So if you had 3 style sheets and they wanted all of them to use, the second one could import the first one and the third one could import the second one and they would all come in. So we have the ability to import an external style sheet into another style sheet using the import at rule. So at import, again, no equals, then the URL and then whatever the URL is, whatever the file name is of the style sheet that you want to import. Okay, so now we're going to work on our style sheet. So we have our TSS styles TXT. We're going to go ahead and rename it. Get rid of that TXT so we know that this is the one that we're working on. We're going to put in our name and our date that we worked on it. And you can see this style sheet has nothing in it. These are all comments. Comments are not doing anything. So if I were to link this directly to my home page, it wouldn't change anything because the styles don't do anything. Everything's commented out. So we're going to go ahead and link that, and then we'll start working on those styles. So we're going to do a link, href equals TSS styles, and it is a style sheet. Okay, save that, and you can see nothing changed. But we're going to go ahead and start playing with that. We are going to add the character encoding above the initial comment setting for our char set. So this is always something that you'd like to do with your CSS files, is make sure that you always include that character encoding. So we're going to do our ampersand or @ symbol, char set, and we're going to use UTF-8, which we've talked about before. A semicolon at the end of it to tell us that we are done with that command. And there is no equals, so don't make the mistake of putting an equal sign in here. It's just ampersand char set, and then the name of the character set that you're going to be using, and then a semicolon. Color in CSS uses either RGB values or HSL values, and we'll talk about what both of those are. So first off, we also use names. So there are 147 color names. No, I did not list them all here. I think some of them are listed in your book. But they're basic color names. And there's some feelings that go along with those, kind of like red is an aggressive color, blue is a calming color, white is for purity and cleanliness and clarity. So some of these colors are going to have an emotional attachment for certain items. So you want to think about the colors that you pick. You're not going to want to always do purple with pink text because it may give off the wrong impression for the site that you're using. Basic color names. So you can just say the color, whatever the attribute is I want to apply, whether it's the text color of color or background color. You can just say background color equals red, and that's fine. You put it in quotes, semicolon at the end, and you should be fine. We also do a lot of RGB values. So RGB is red, green, blue. They go in that order. They are the intensity of the primary color, red, green, and blue, in order. And they are the number between 0 and 255. When we do RGB triplets, which is this 255, 255, 255 that go together, we can create a RGB value that will give us a specific color that uses a intensity of the given value. So if you do 255.00, you would get red, because red is at 100%, or 255 for its intensity. Green and blue are both at 0. If you wanted to do yellow, you would do 0, 255, 255, which is 100% green, 100% blue with 0 red. I'm sorry, red, green with no blue. Yeah, because red and green make yellow. Sorry, red and yellow and blue make green. Different version. So for yellow, you would do 255, 255, 0, and that would give you yellow, which is 100% red and green with no blue. You can do variations of all of this, and you can play around with it, and you'll see when we get into the RGB wheel how we could play around with that. The other way of defining colors, also in the RGB, you can do hexadecimal numbers, which is 0 to F to apply to 8. So you could do 8, and then variations of that thereafter to get up to 255. So when you do hexadecimal numbers, you're doing a different binary or a hexadecimal numbering system, which is a little different than what we're used to. If you're comfortable with hex, feel free. If you're not and you want to use the 255, feel free to do that as well. The other type of color that we talk about that is kind of pushed a little bit in HTML5 and CSS3 is going to be our HSL colors. Now, hue, saturation, and light is what that refers to. Hue is the color. It's the tint of the color in a color wheel from 0 to 365 or 360 degrees around a color wheel. So if you look at the color wheel that's on the page right now, down in the lower left-hand side, or right-hand side, you can see that red starts at the top. That's 0. And it's a little bit weird if you're a math major and you're trying to find out how 0 got to be at the top in the 90-degree spot. It's because 0 is at the top. Just go with it. So it starts at 0, and that is red. And then it goes around and ends up at green at 120 degrees, and then keeps going and goes to blue at 240. RGB still goes in that same order, RGB. So red, green, blue at 120 degrees for each section of the pie, which is 1/3 of 360. And then it changes, going from red to green with yellow in the middle. So you can see how the color wheel does. So the first thing we look at is hue, which is your tint or your color that you're going to start with. The next is the saturation, which is the intensity of the color. When we talked about RGB, we talked about the intensity of red, green, and blue. Well, you can have an intensity of any of the colors on the color wheel this way, where it's how much color are you bringing in from 0, which is no color, up to 100%, which is full color. Last, we use light, and light is how bright the color is. 0 is no brightness, so no light, so that's black, up to 100%, which is white. So if you look at the example here of this kind of orange color, we've used 38 degrees or 38 for our tint, and that's that orange, 90% saturation, so a pretty significant darker color or more orange, and then 60% for our light. So not really, really heavy saturated, but just at a range. So we like to use these colors because we feel like they give us more options when it comes to what colors can be expressed as. In our RGB and our HSL values, we did add the ability to add an opacity, which is how solid is that color as far as transparent, so that items can be seen through them. So your opacity is, can the item that's sitting behind it be seen through it? And we'll see that with a couple of our images where we want some of the image to come through, but not all of it. So we can alter the opacity. Opacity is defined from 0 to 1, and it uses a decimal. So it would be like 0.7 or 0.3. And you can do it with both RGA or RGB and HSL. I think I've got that backwards. HSL, and then you just add an A to the end, and that will tell us the opacity of that color. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start working on our HTML and body styles. We're going to change around some of our styles on our page here. The first thing we're going to do with our colors is we are going to do an HTML. So all of the HTML, remember how it is inherited. So everything below HTML is going to get this, which means everything on the page, unless it's otherwise defined. So we're going to do a background color, and you'll see that there's a lot of options here that the IntelliSense will pop up. I'm going to do background color, and it also includes the hexadecimal number and the name of some of the named ones. In this case, we're going to be using the hue saturation light to define it as a 27, 72%, and 72%. Whoops, comma. It will decide it's going to be that pink color, that light pink. Don't forget the semicolon at the end. Now, if I refresh right now, after saving, you will see it adds that kind of salmon color. That's going to be the base background for all of the HTML. However, for the body, we want it to be different. So we're going to do our body tag. We are going to do our color, and we're going to use an RGB. This one's going to be 91, 91, 91, which is kind of a grayish color. And then we're going to change the background color of just the body to be ivory. Okay. So now when we refresh, you can look at it and go, okay, well, but wait, where did the salmon go? The salmon went away all entirely. Yes, except if you make the page bigger. So what we did is in our, because of the way my page is, it's just not big enough. So let's make the page bigger over here. So as you can see, making the page bigger, it has created this section where the body is only a certain width. And because of that, it has a max width of 1020 in this case. At 1020, the body is going to stop creating. And so it needs something behind that. That's where that salmon color came in. So you can see the way that I have it smushed here, you can't really see the salmon color because I have my page really small. But if you make your page a full size, you'll see that salmon. We are also going to be adding some heading style rules. So our H1s, we're going to want to make those white with a background of RGB 222, 128, and 60, which is kind of similar to that salmon, but a little bit darker. So that's our H1s. I'm going to go ahead and save that and refresh and show you what those look like. See, they're kind of this orange. And we're going to make our H2s. Our H2s are going to again have the color of white and a background color of RGB 235, 177, and 131, which is a lighter orange. And you can see this little orange is a little bit lighter than this darker orange for the headers. So we've differentiated between our H1s and our H2s. We gave them both different colors, and we've added this background salmon color and our ivory here with our base text color still of being black. We could have done H1 comma H2 and done them both with white and the same background color, but we wanted this background for classes to be a different color. So we like to kind of keep those separate. And sometimes in CSS for backgrounds, you really want to do that. You want to keep each of those individual tags separate if you're going to be making them differently. So as I said, in older browsers, in older web development, sometimes the older browsers don't know all of the new CSS3 rules. And that's okay. You want to make sure that your site can be seen by as many people as possible without there being complications. So what we try to do is give what's called progressive enhancement, which is allowing the older browsers to still be able to see something, maybe not as perfect as you wanted it, but at least it's something significant. So what we do is we can apply the same attribute multiple times. In this case, in the example, what I've done here is I've given background color both as an RGB and as an HSL. So if my older browser doesn't know what an HSL is, what it's going to do is it's going to look at the RGB value, apply that, then it's going to look at the HSL and go, I don't know how to do that, and move on. A newer browser is going to look at it and go, RGB, cool, I can apply that. HSL, yeah, I can apply that too. So I'm going to apply that instead of my RGB. So it's progressive. As you go down, the older browsers will stop at a given point and won't be able to understand it, but the newer browsers will. But at least you will have some HTML or some CSS to define your page so that it doesn't look boring or lame. So it does have some of that CSS in there. It just might not look as good as you really, really wanted to. So this is the point of progressive enhancement.